Stick to the registers. You never go to the safe. Welcome back to the program. I'm still Colin Coyle, and I would like to begin by asking you, how's your Women's Month going? Because I meant that shit. When I wished you a happy Women's Month during the last episode, I meant it. And I'm someone who's going to check in and make sure that you're doing what you can do during Women's Month to, step on the throat of the patriarchy. I want to make sure you're doing it. When I wished you a happy Women's Month, I wasn't wishing you a happy Women's Month in the way your job does, in the way you get an email saying this is how we support women by paying them the same amount of money. Yeah. That's for a different episode. Okay, actually, no, I'll make a point. If we are during Women's Month, allow me to talk about the pay gap, because I can't think of anything more apropos of what's going on and anyone more qualified to do it. So, if we are to accept, and I was someone who did for a while, but just logically, here's a question. If we are to accept that women make on average 72 cents or 76 cents to every dollar that a man makes, why is every single employee of every single company not a woman? Because let me ask you, if you run a company, wouldn't you want to hire someone who's cheaper? That poked a big hole in my logic, but back to celebrating Women's Month. So, happy Women's Month. I hope you're doing your part. I hope you are doing your part in the way the company Hershey is doing its part. The candy company. Hershey. Hershey Candy. That makes candy. I can't stress that enough. Which is also headquarters in Hershey, Pennsylvania, a town which, in addition to its claim to fame being a candy company, is based here. The other greatest attraction of Hershey, Pennsylvania is the fact an RV show comes to town once a year. So the people of Hershey, Pennsylvania and the Hershey Company have really done their part this month by, during an ad campaign that they rolled out online on social media, which I'm sure was not devised in any way by their social media team to simply draw the most engagement, regardless of positive or negative feedback. I'm sure they weren't basing, trends and available data to construct a ad campaign which will simply get attention, which is the sum total goal. It has nothing to do with a message people can get behind. We just want people to talk about it. All press is good press. Back to celebrating Women's Month. So Hershey did their part this month by rolling out a campaign featuring a woman who looked like me. There's really no other way to say that. This girl looked like me. And that is in no way a reference to what I imagine was this lady's enormous penis. No, that wasn't the only comparison between me and this lady. She looked like me just because she had red hair. Like anyone else who has red hair, she looked like, a friend of Harry Potter's. She looked like someone who was interested in defense against the dark arts, which, admittedly I am too. I don't fuck with the dark arts. And if you fuck with the dark arts, if you are a practitioner of the dark arts, this ain't the podcast for you, but keep it moving. There's plenty of other podcasts you could listen to, like Tim Dillon's, if there's any new episodes out. But anyway, Hershey had the whole internet a storm and a buzz and a talking, basically exactly what the goal of any social media campaign is, by the fact that they put a transgendered man who looks pretty much like me as the central figure celebrating Women's Month. And again, this is all coming out of the PR department of a candy company. We got to take a moment every now and then and ask ourselves, is this worth us having an opinion on, or is this truly something that does not matter at all? You got to take a step back and ask yourself. Otherwise, you're going to die of a coronary way too early, way younger than you need to, if you're getting up in arms about the fact that Hershey put a transgendered woman at the central figure of their Women's Month campaign, who, again, looks like me. If you're getting upset about that, don't buy the candy bar. I don't know what to tell you. Join a men's rights group. I don't know. I don't really honestly have any solutions for you, because if you are against Hershey, if you are on the side of the patriarchy, and you think what me and Hershey and millions of other women across the world are doing this month is wrong, well, I got news for you, buddy. I'm an ally. I have a Hershey bar lodged up my ass right now. That's how much of an ally I am. And we are done with your patriarchy. So if you think anything that we're doing is absurd, isn't truly championing the real cause of the month, if you have anything other than essentially what we want you to say exactly, you can go suck a dick, bro, because we're feminists. That's essentially what I took from all of that. And again, like most of the things I'm here to talk about, some of that happened. Most of it was me making it up and sounding serious at random parts, but all of it was genuinely absurd. I don't really have a strong opinion on the candy company taking a stand during Women's Month because you know why? I'm a fucking person with things to do. If you're getting upset about the PR getting pumped out of the Mars bars makers, you're a fucking idiot. I really don't know any other way to break that down. I don't think if you managed, let me put it this way, if you somehow manage to incorporate political ideology into a candy company, you should lose your right to vote. If you can somehow work in political affiliation, what's the term? Identity politics. If you can bring all of those things in to the makers of M&Ms, and you can truly find yourself so galvanized to either take sides with them or against them, you are a fucking idiot. You should not have an ability to vote. I'm sure there are felons much, much more qualified walking around today who have served their time, who I would feel much more comfortable voting than people upset at the Hershey Company's Women's Month campaign featuring a transgendered woman who kind of looks like me. If that is what really gets you to the polls, I say we close the polls to you. That's what I say. I say you lose your right to vote because there are much bigger things going on. Because this is just me. I tend to be interested in grand conspiracies involving the government. Generally, when you're interested in those types of things, people tend to not be interested in you as a person because they think you're crazy. And one of the fucking worst parts about being crazy is you're actually right. You're not crazy. But then, of course, there are crazy people, and then you have to deal with not looking like them, even though they are kind of onto something, but they're also far away from the actual thing. You know what I mean? You probably don't. But thanks for listening. So what I'm getting at is the bigger news, apart from Hershey bars and Women's Month, was the January 6th footage that the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who took 17 times to win the job, decided to give to Tucker Carlson, which probably isn't the best move. He said it was in the interest of transparency. Maybe you just give it to everyone, not just one guy who's known for being biased. But how could me, a guy who's known for being biased, really have an issue with that? So I'm going to call a spade here. You know what I'm saying? But what we learned from watching this footage, and I'm seriously not making this part up, was the footage revealed Capitol Police officers literally opening doors and escorting the QAnon shaman. You remember the guy with the fucking horns on his head? The Viking from Florida who took a Greyhound up to D.C. for the day to really get involved, who I'm sure also has a strong opinion on Hershey bars and transgendered people? That guy, the footage revealed, certainly looked like, I don't know why I almost turned into Chris Rock there. I mean, it looked like he was friendly with the Capitol Police because the Capitol Police were literally opening doors for the QAnon shaman to just walk into. It didn't look like they were trying to apprehend somebody dressed like a Viking from Florida who just broke into the White House. It actually looked like they were escorting him somewhere. It almost looked like he had objectives and things to accomplish, or at the very least, directives given to him. Now, I could be wrong, but again, there's literally footage of it. And again, you know, not to be the guy who's like, hey, the government is behind a lot of conspiracy shit. I don't want to sound crazy. But again, I would also like to remind you that of the Capitol Police officers who responded to January 6th, 4 of them have committed suicide since, 2 of them committing suicide literally that day. And then, of course, the 5th Capitol Police sergeant, or whoever was like, it was above the 4 police officers who committed suicide, their boss, like the whatever sergeant lieutenant of the Capitol Police, who was just about to testify in front of the January 6th committee, suddenly died of a heart attack because he had a heart condition that was never documented before. So that event, which had 4 Capitol Police officers commit suicide and their boss die of a heart attack, which he never had a history of having a problem with, and now there is footage of fellow Capitol Police officers opening doors for a self-proclaimed shaman dressed like a Viking from Florida who arrived on a Greyhound bus to overthrow the government. Now, those were a lot of words, and I honestly got to pat myself on the back because I think a lot of those words were pretty entertaining in that order. But what is to be taken from what I have just said to you is some shit is afoot. The game is at play. Hunter be hunted. If you ain't on the take, you getting took. All a gators bitches best be wearing jimmies. What if I just kept digressing into weirder and weirder, potentially racist, anyway. So the footage seems to reveal, at the very least indicate, that the leader, not like the voted democratically elected leader of the QAnon idiots, but pretty much the guy the news said in the Viking hat is a key figure in the QAnon people, one of those people appears on camera getting escorted by the very people supposed to arrest him. The very people who are supposed to apprehend this leader of the idiots who just stormed the White House have been caught on camera opening doors and telling him where things are. Now, again, what does that indicate to you? I don't want to get anyone caught up, but it doesn't necessarily look, innocent. And I don't want to sound crazy, but how many things do you need to see before you realize it's not crazy to say, hey, why does it look like the police are helping the bad guys? I mean, when it gets to that level of in your face backwards, you are crazy if you don't start asking that question. I don't know how anyone, and I get one of the hardest conspiracies for people to get into are these agent provocateurs, this psyop nonsense, this thing where people think the government stages attacks on purpose or does things simply because the negative outcome will still yield positive results that they are looking for. Whenever you bring up things like that, people check out. And for a lot of times, good reasons, because seriously, people have lost lives in these events. But you have to be honest with yourself. You got to look at literally the footage in front of you and say, what? When you read that the Proud Boys literally were involved in the group storming the Capitol, and they were receiving text messages from the FBI directing them as to what to do. When you read that, you got to say, what? When you see footage of the Capitol Police letting people in, you got to say, what? You have to eventually have a limit, because at a certain point, you cross this threshold where your ability to not question and to not see things clearly in front of your eyes, to not take in information, to just flatly reject objective truth, you have either A, joined the Mormon church, or you have just crossed a point of no return, and you will believe anything. Because I honestly think if you can see footage of the bad guys getting let in by the cops and not have any questions, something is off. You probably have a very strong opinion on what Hershey's doing this month and transgendered rights. You're probably that type of stupid. You're probably someone who is very much excited about the fact that the WWE is in negotiations to allow sports betting on their program. You're probably that type of stupid. And that's also not a joke. We'll get back into more serious government stuff, but first, a quick aside. This is real. The WWE, which is a wrestling program, which is scripted because it's wrestling, again, scripted because it's wrestling, is in talks with the state of Colorado and the state of Michigan to allow legalized gambling on their scripted matches. So just again, to reiterate what all that means, the WWE, which is a scripted television show where the results of every match are written by people who went to Harvard and wrote on the Lampoon, will soon be able to allow the smartest people in our society to gamble on who they think will win, on whether or not The Undertaker has an edge tonight over Kane or some shit. I don't know. I haven't watched it since I literally wore underoos. But isn't that insane? I mean, this is a thing that is scripted that we're now going to bet on. And if you're excited about that, you're probably very upset about Hershey this month, and you're probably very much upset when people say, hey, why does it look like the Capitol Police let the bad guys in? You're probably that level of mentally closed off. I don't want to be that, which is why I think professional wrestling is still a little dorky. Hershey's a great company, and I have a lot of questions about the government letting QAnon people in during January 6th. And speaking of things that just don't add up, I don't know if you've seen, but there's been another train derailment in Ohio. Now, this is the third one in Ohio. And again, Ohio is a town, not a town, it's a state that has a lot of trains moving through it. You have to accept all that. But if you are still one of the people who keeps reading about these train derailments, all of the people in the town, wherever these trains are derailed, are suddenly forced to quarantine. And if you hear about this, you keep reading about these stories, and you're like, well, it's just another train that went off the tracks. You're a dum-dum. You shouldn't be able to vote. You're probably going to gamble on the WWE, and I bet you have a strong opinion about transgendered rights and Hershey bars. I stand on the opposite side of all of those points. The fact that we have multiple train crashes, no more than an hour tops from where we literally keep aliens, FBI, stop listening, and all of a sudden, anytime a train crashes, now citizens are being quarantined. And the last 2 train crashes, no one said there were any reports of toxic chemicals on them, so why all of a sudden do people need to be quarantined? I'm just saying, have some questions. Think about that. At least be able to ask some questions. The footage of these trains derailing are insane. There's just people stopped at a train crossing in their car. If you can find these videos on Twitter, and all of a sudden a massive train just starts crashing. Now, I don't know what these are, but whenever these trains crash, immediately FEMA's called in, and people are quarantined and not allowed to leave their homes, or if they do and forget their pets then die because of the air quality. Something very strange is going on with that. No? Do you not think that's a little interesting? A little perplexing? Dare I say, nefarious? And yet, there are people who probably just because they're scared and don't want to admit it, but there are still people that I've talked to in daily life because of like, hey, have you seen the new train crash that happened? It's kind of like a thing now in the news. There are people I interact with who are like, trains crash, man. It's not that big a deal. You're being crazy. Stop trying to tell me to listen to your podcast. You know what I mean? Those are usually the conversations I have with people. And these people, I'm like, dude, how can you in your head tell me that it is suddenly normal all of a sudden to see a new train crash every other week in the same state? None of that makes sense. Trains crash. Trains also crash mostly in states where there are more trains than the average states. Ohio is a state that has more trains than the average state. However, those trains have been there for a very long time. Twitter has been there for a very long time. And granted, there is the Barbra Streisand effect of where you see something and then you start to see something more and more, even though it's the same amount that's been happening the whole time. All of that granted, it's still a tough sell that there are so many train crashes that it has become blasé to talk about, and all of them keep happening in the same state where we keep aliens. You know, it's hard to convince me nothing's going on there. Granted, trains crash. Ohio has a lot of trains. However, that was my Chris Rock transition. It's hard to convince me that all of them keep happening, everyone keeps catching them on camera, and FEMA keeps telling people to quarantine, even though there aren't even chemicals on the last few train crashes. Hard to convince me or any other person sound and right in mind and body and spirit that that's not at least weird. Don't you think? Be worried about stuff like that. Be more interested in stuff like that. Have the tenacity and outrage that you have for Hershey when they come out and say, this girl who looks like Colin Coyle is going to be the woman of the month for our candy company. When something like that happens and you feel the urge to take to the streets with picket signs, instead refocus that energy towards asking why it looks like there's footage of the Capitol Police allowing the QAnon shaman to walk into certain rooms. Apply that energy to wondering why there's so many train crashes in the same state, so much so that people just conversationally are bored with it. Tweet at Pete Buttigieg just as much as you tweet at Hershey about how upset you are that M&Ms have nuts in it during Women's Month. You know what I'm saying? All right, probably not my best joke. But what my point is people, and honestly, this is what makes me crazy. This is what probably makes me a kook, what makes me a Looney Tune, because I see what Hershey's doing, and I see how patently absurd it is, and how inconsequential it is at all, how little it matters, how little impact it has on the world, and how everyone who's worked on Hershey's controversial Trans Women's Month campaign or whatever will, like everyone else, be swept away by the sands of time, and their contributions to society will amount to essentially a lost memory that amounted to nothing. These are nonsense things that people are upset about, but everyone's upset about them. And I see all of this while also seeing the fact that there's footage of the Capitol Police allowing the QAnon shaman to walk into rooms. There's multiple train crashes happening in the same state where we keep aliens. I see that happening at the same time, and then I go, you know, I feel like Hershey's in on this somehow. I feel like a phone call might have been made from the government to one of these Fortune 500 companies and said, hey, we have a real, insurrection/alien problem on our hands. Do you guys mind making someone who looks like Colin Coyle the Woman of the Month for Hershey's? Could you, yeah, just give. I know you guys were planning on celebrating Women's Month over at Hershey with some campaign. Could you do us a favor and just make sure your woman has a dick and red hair, an enormous dick and red hair, just so everyone will get upset and talk about that online, and instead not look into like all of the alien slash insurrection sedition activity happening over here? Is that cool? And then they hang up. And then I sound crazy because you don't want to think that's actually happening. But then you read about the Twitter files and you're like, oh shit, that might have very well happened. So the way I see it, you can do one of two things. You can either then choose to be a informed, sovereign citizen who holds your government accountable and whose voice is heard in the democratic process in this great republic of ours. Or the other thing you could do, the more noble thing to do, would be to continue to fight the fight against the patriarchy, be on the right side of history, and put a Hershey bar up your ass. Happy Women's Month again.